Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Wartime Stories, where we delve into the shadowy corners of military history, the experiences that linger long after the battles have ended. Tonight, we're turning our attention to a place where the line between duty and dread blurs under the Mediterranean moon, the Dikelia sovereign base area in Cyprus. Imagine this, a sprawling military installation, home to British forces since the 1960s, nestled on the eastern edge of the island. The sun-baked terrain, dotted with olive groves and ancient ruins, seems idyllic by day. But as night falls, something shifts. Whispers echo through the barracks, shadows move where they shouldn't, and hardened soldiers, men and women trained to face any enemy, find themselves questioning what lurks in the dark. Let me set the stage with some hard facts to ground us. Cyprus has been a strategic jewel for empires throughout history. Persians, Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans, and finally the British. In 1960, when Cyprus gained independence from Britain, the UK retained two sovereign base areas, Akrotiri in the west and Dikelia in the east, as part of the treaty. Dikelia, covering about 98 square kilometers, includes not just military facilities but also villages, farmland, and even a power station. It's home to units like the 2nd Battalion, the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, and serves as a key staging point for operations in the Middle East. Over the decades, it's seen its share of tension. The 1974 Turkish invasion that divided the island, ongoing UN peacekeeping efforts along the Green Line, and modern deployments supporting conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. But here's where it gets intriguing. Amid the routine of patrols, training exercises, and garrison life, stories have circulated among the ranks, tales that aren't in any official after-action reports. Soldiers speaking in hushed tones about unexplained occurrences in the older barracks blocks, remnants from the base's early days. These aren't campfire ghost stories. They're accounts from credible sources, NCOs, officers, and squaddies who've served tours there. I've pieced together testimonies from multiple veterans, cross-referenced with declassified documents and forum discussions from military personnel. What emerges is a pattern, a haunting that traces back to the island's turbulent past, perhaps tied to the souls displaced during the invasion, or even older grievances from Cyprus's bloody history. Why do these stories persist? In a profession where fear is the real enemy, why would troops refuse night guard duty in certain sectors? Is it mass hysteria, the stress of deployment, or something more inexplicable? As we explore this, remember, these are real people sharing their experiences. We'll approach it with the respect it deserves. No sensationalism, just the facts as they recall them. So settle in, dim the lights, and let's uncover why, in the dead of night, even the bravest might hesitate to stand watch alone. Chapter 1. The arrival at Dikelia. I remember stepping off the transport aircraft into the wall of heat that is Cyprus like it was yesterday. My first overseas posting with 1st Battalion the Rifles, and the air carried that unmistakable 1009 of pine, salt sea, and hot tarmac. We were bussed directly to Dikelia Garrison, rolling through multiple checkpoints along roads that skirted the edge of the Green Line. From the windows the base looked familiar enough. Long rows of low concrete buildings, parade squares bleached white by the sun, vehicle parks filled with warriors and Land Rovers, and the constant thump of rotor blades as helicopters practiced insertions in the distance. Standard British Army layout, the kind you could drop into blindfolded and still find your way to the cookhouse. What struck me immediately, though, was the way some of the older hands looked at certain parts of the garrison. Their eyes would slide toward the eastern accommodation blocks, faded, single-story structures half swallowed by eucalyptus trees and bougainvillea, and then quickly away again, as if they'd been caught staring at something they shouldn't. Block 7 was pointed out on the map during our in-processing brief as the one we'd be occupying. The platoon sergeant, a stocky Geordie named Mills with more operational tours than I had years in the Army, delivered the standard welcome speech. Rules, routines, quick reaction force commitments, and the importance of staying sharp because we were still in a semi-operational environment. He finished with a line that seemed routine at the time, but stuck with me later. Guard rotations are mandatory, lads. No exceptions. Stick to your posts, follow SOPs, and don't go wandering off after dark. This isn't Salisbury Plain. He said it with a flat tone that didn't invite questions, and we all filed it under the usual new unit hazing. Unpack your kit, stow your weapon, draw bedding, find the NAFI, normal arrival drill. That first evening passed quickly enough. We sorted ourselves into the block, claimed bunks, and traded the usual banter about who had drawn the worst mattress or the locker closest to the fire door. Block 7 was old school. Cracked linoleum floors, windows that didn't quite close properly, and a faint smell of damp that no amount of bleach ever fully removed. The corridors were long and dimly lit even in daylight, with doors leading off to section rooms, ablutions, and storerooms that hadn't been opened in years. Outside, the cicadas were deafening, and the heat lingered long after sunset. I drew the short straw for the first night's sentry duty, 0200 to 0400 on the perimeter near the old ammunition bunkers. Standard roving patrol. Walk the fence line, check the gates, report anything unusual. I kitted up, signed for the radio, and relieved the previous sentry at the guardroom. The lad handing over looked relieved to be finishing his shift. He muttered something about it being quiet enough and disappeared quickly back toward the accommodation. The moon was almost full, turning the landscape silver and black. The wire fence stretched away in both directions, topped with concertina razor wire that glinted whenever I swept my torch across it. Beyond the perimeter lay scrubland and olive groves, then the darker line of trees marking the edge of restricted areas. I started my patrol, boots crunching on the gravel track. SA-80 slung but ready, senses tuned the way they teach you. At first it was textbook quiet. No wind, no animal noises, just the low hum of the base generators in the distance. Then, maybe 20 minutes in, I heard it. Voices. Low, murmured conversation. Too far away to make out words, but close enough to carry on the still air. Greek, I thought at first, or possibly Turkish, hard to tell. They sounded like 2 or 3 people arguing, urgency in the tone. I stopped, listened harder, then keyed the radio. Control, this is post 4. Hearing voices east of the ammo compound, approximately 100 meters outside the wire. Over. The reply came back crisp. Post 4, control. Negative on that. No patrols scheduled in your sector. Thermal shows clear. Probably echo off the hills or local farmers. Maintain watch. Out. Farmers at 2 in the morning. I wasn't convinced, but I acknowledged and carried on. The voices faded for a while, then returned closer this time, almost as if they were pacing alongside me on the other side of the fence. I swept the torch beam across the tree line. Nothing. No movement. No glint of eyes. No heat shimmer. Then I saw the figure. It was standing motionless just inside the wire, maybe 30 meters away, half lit by moonlight. Tall, in uniform, definitely military. But the cut looked wrong, outdated. The helmet shape wasn't right for current issue, more like the old steel pots from decades ago. I brought the rifle up instinctively, challenged in the approved manner. Halt. Identify yourself. Hands where I can see them. No movement. No response. The figure just stood there, head turned toward me. And the eyes, Christ. The eyes caught the moonlight in a way that made my skin crawl, reflecting back pale and steady. I repeated the challenge, louder, finger indexing the safety catch. Still nothing. Then it raised one arm slowly, pointing directly at me. I felt the hairs on my neck rise. I was about to call it in again when the figure simply thinned, like smoke dispersing. It lost definition and was gone. No footsteps, no rustle of vegetation, just empty space where it had been. I stood frozen for seconds that felt like minutes, torch beam shaking slightly as I swept the area. Nothing. No tracks when I checked the ground the next morning in daylight. No disturbance of the dust inside the perimeter. When my relief arrived at 0400, I handed over without mentioning it. Didn't want to sound like a boot recruit seeing shadows on first watch. But over breakfast in the cookhouse, Private Jenkins from another section leaned across the table, voice low. You were on the eastern perimeter last night, weren't you? Hear anything odd? I played it cool. Voices. Thought it was locals. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Locals don't walk through razor wire, mate. And they don't wear uniforms from the 70s. You'll hear more if you're billeted in Block 7 long enough. They say the whole eastern side was built over land that got complicated in 74. People who never left. I told him he was full of it. But the seed was planted. That night had been only the beginning, and something told me the voices, and the silent watcher, weren't finished with us yet. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Dark. Corporal Ellis, Royal Engineers. Attached to the squadron at Dekelia. I'd already done 2 tours in Helmand, seen mates lost to IEDs and small arms fire, and thought I'd built up a pretty solid tolerance for anything the army could throw at me. Stress, fear, the lot. I knew how to compartmentalize and get the job done. So when I arrived at the garrison and got billeted in Block 7, I didn't give the usual new posting rumors a second thought. Old buildings creak, pipes bang, heat plays tricks on your eyes. Standard. Block 7 was one of the original accommodation blocks, thrown up quickly in the early 60s when the sovereign base areas were established. Single-story, flat roof, long central corridor with rooms off both sides, communal ablutions at one end and a small cookhouse annex at the other. The walls were thick concrete, painted that institutional cream that goes gray over time, and the floors were covered in worn linoleum that squeaked under combat boots. By day it was just another barracks. Boots thundering down the corridor for morning PT, the smell of brewing tea and frying eggs drifting from the section rooms, lads shouting banter while cleaning rifles after range days. Normal garrison life. But the nights were different. It started with small things I could explain away. I'd be lying in my bunk after a long day on the power station detail or out repairing perimeter track, trying to wind down enough to sleep. The heat hung heavy even after sunset, and the ceiling fan did little more than move the warm air around. Then I'd hear footsteps in the corridor, heavy, deliberate, like someone in full kit pacing slowly from one end of the block to the other. I'd sit up, listen. The steps would stop right outside my door, breathing, low and ragged, as if the person had just come off a long tab. I'd call out, "Who's there?" Nothing. No answer. No retreating steps. Just silence again. After a minute or two, I'd lie back down, telling myself it was one of the lads getting up for a piss or checking the fire point. But no doors opened or closed. No light flicked on under the frame. Just that heavy presence lingering for a moment before fading. A week in, I was paired on Overwatch during a night exercise simulating a breach along the buffer zone. Me and Lance Corporal Tate were dug into a scrape line overlooking the restricted area. NVGs on, keeping eyes on the dark fields that stretched toward the green line. Tate was a good lad, steady under pressure. Around 0230, he nudged me with his elbow. "You hearing that, Corp?" I tilted my head. At first I thought it was wind in the olive trees, but then it resolved into something clearer. Singing. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A slow, mournful melody. The kind of old Greek folk song you'd hear drifting from a taverna in the villages. A woman's voice, carrying across the still air. I keyed the radio. QRF control. This is Overwatch 2. Reporting audio anomaly sector echo. Possible local source beyond the wire. Sounds like singing. Over. The reply was immediate. Overwatch 2 control. Negative contact. Drone thermal shows sector clear. Maintain position. Out. We looked at each other. Tate shrugged, but I could see the unease in his eyes, even through the green glow of the goggles. The singing went on for another 10 minutes, rising and falling, before it faded into the night. Back in the block after stand down, things escalated. I was in the ablutions block brushing my teeth when the mirror started fogging up. No hot water had been run. Everyone was on cold showers because of a pump issue. Yet the glass clouded over from the center outward, as if someone had breathed on it from the other side. I wiped it clear with my forearm. For a second I thought I saw movement behind me in the reflection. Dark shapes shifting at the edge of vision. I spun round. Empty. Just the row of sinks and cracked tiles. That same night, trying to get some kip, I half woke to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of my bunk. The mattress dipped under weight that wasn't there when I opened my eyes. Cold air settled over me like a blanket. Then a voice, soft, almost in my ear. Female, accented, speaking broken English. Leave. Our home. Blood. On ground. I shot upright, heart hammering, grabbing for the mag light under my pillow. Swept the beam around the room. Empty bunks, sleeping lads snoring gently. Moonlight striping the floor through half-closed blinds. Nothing. Next morning over breakfast I mentioned it casually to the Padre during his rounds. He gave me that understanding look they train them for. A lot of history here, son. The island's seen more than its share of suffering. EOKA days. The invasion in 74, thousands displaced, villages emptied overnight. Some say the ground remembers. I nodded like it was nothing, but the word stuck. Later that week, walking past one of the abandoned storage huts near the block, I caught sight of fresh earth turned over in a patch where nothing should have been growing. Small mounds, like old graves disturbed. No one had been digging there. Vehicle tracks would have shown. The whispers started after that. Not loud, not constant, but always at the edge of hearing. Fragments of conversation in languages I didn't speak. Names called out that weren't ours. The occasional sob or sharp intake of breath as if someone had just been struck. Lads began leaving lights on in the corridors after last light. A couple requested moves to newer blocks. No one talked openly, but you could feel it. The block wasn't just old. It was occupied, and whatever shared it with us wasn't leaving anytime soon. Chapter 3. Shadows on the Wire. Lance Bombardier Hayes, Royal Artillery, posted to Decalia as part of the gun battery providing support to the resident infantry battalion. We handled the L-118 light guns and the heavier stuff when it rotated through. But most days it was maintenance, training, and the occasional live fire package out on the ranges. Garrison life was steady. Early mornings on the parade square, vehicle checks, then afternoons in the gun shed stripping and reassembling the breech blocks until your hands smelled permanently of gun oil. The artillery lines were on the western side of the garrison, newer buildings with better aircon. But the perimeter fence ran right around the whole base, and guard duty pulled lads from every cap badge. The sangas, those elevated concrete posts with sandbagged roofs and mounted GPMGs, were spaced along the wire at regular intervals. 2-hour shifts, 2 men per post usually, but sickness or detachments could leave you solo. The fence itself was serious business. Double-layered chain link with razor coils on top, sensors buried in the ground, and thermal cameras feeding back to the guardroom. Beyond it lay the buffer zone in places, or just empty scrub and abandoned farmland that had been left fallow since the division of the island. At night it was a black void broken only by the distant lights of villages on both sides. My first real brush with whatever haunted the place came on a night with no moon at all. Heavy cloud cover, warm rain coming down in sheets, turning the tracks to slick mud. I was on Sanga duty alone because my oppo had gone down with a stomach bug that was ripping through the block. I didn't mind, quiet shift, chance to catch up on some thinking time. I had the Browning mounted and ready, radio checks every 30 minutes, and a thermos of tea to keep me going. About an hour in, the thermal imager picked up something. A single heat signature moving parallel to the fence, maybe 50 meters out. Human-shaped, but the movement was wrong, jerky, halting, like someone injured or drunk. I watched it for a full minute, tracking as it closed the distance. When it reached the wire it stopped dead, just standing there in the downpour. I keyed the radio. Control, this is Sanga 5. Single contact approaching grid 345678. Humanoid, no visible weapon. Request permission to illuminate and challenge. Over. The guard commander came back quickly. Sanga 5, illuminate and challenge. Patrol is scrambling. Hold fire unless threatened. Out. I flicked on the xenon searchlight. The beam cut through the rain like a blade, pinning the figure in harsh white. It was a man, military uniform, soaked through, rifle slung across his chest. But the kit was old. Baggy trousers tucked into boots, a helmet shape I didn't recognize at first, webbing that looked like it belonged in a museum. Turkish army, I realized with a jolt. From the 70s. The face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes sunken. And the left side of his head, half of it simply wasn't there. Just a dark ruin where shrapnel or a round had taken it away. I challenged anyway, voice steady even though my pulse was hammering. Halt. This is a restricted military area. Step back from the wire and identify yourself. No reaction. He just stared straight at me, rain streaming down what was left of his face. Then he raised one arm slowly, pointing directly at the Sanga at me. The finger was steady, deliberate. I felt the cold hit me harder than the rain, right in the chest. I repeated the challenge louder. Still nothing. Then the figure turned and walked straight into the wire. Not climbed, not forced, just walked forward as if it wasn't there. The razor coils should have shredded him, but he passed through without disturbance. No snagged cloth, no blood. He kept coming until he was 10 meters from the Sanga base, then stopped again. The pointing arm dropped. He looked up at me one last time, mouth moving like he was trying to speak, and then he simply dissolved. Like ink in water, the shape thinned and vanished into the rain. I fired a warning burst into the ground, 3 rounds, controlled. The muzzle flash lit the area white for an instant. Empty. Nothing on thermal. The patrol arrived 5 minutes later, boots slipping in the mud, torches sweeping. No footprints outside the wire. No disturbance inside. Just wet concrete and the smell of cordite hanging in the air. Next morning, the lads in the battery gave me the predictable ribbing. New guy seeing things. Too much time on Xbox. But Gunnar Patel, a quiet lad from Manchester who'd been there longer, pulled me aside during brew break. "You're not the first, mate. I've seen them too, groups sometimes 5 or 6, moving along the fence like they're still on patrol, whispering in Turkish, arguing about orders from the sound of it." He told me how he'd once watched a whole section of ghostly soldiers dig and along the wire, shovels biting earth that never moved, before fading at dawn. No one reported it officially. Didn't want the psych eval or the piss-taking that would never end. After that night, I started noticing the shadows more. Dark shapes detaching from the base of the sengas just at the edge of vision. Cold spots that made your breath fog, even in summer heat. The Browning would jam inexplicably on checks that had been perfect hours earlier. Once, clearing a stoppage, I swear I felt breath on my neck and a voice right in my ear, low, urgent, foreign words I didn't understand, but somehow knew meant, "Go back." Word spread quietly. Lads began swapping shifts to avoid the eastern sangas after dark. Excuses piled up. Kit to clean, courses to study for, sudden headaches. Even the sergeants turned a blind eye. No one wanted to be the one left alone with the shadows that walked the wire, reliving a fight that had ended decades ago, but somehow never really stopped. And they were always watching, always waiting for the next patrol to come too close. Chapter 4. The Unseen Presence. Private First Class Morgan, Royal Military Police, part of the small RMP detachment responsible for law and order across the Dikelia sovereign base area. Our tasks ranged from gate checks and traffic control to responding to disturbances in the accommodation blocks or investigating the occasional theft from the Nafi. We worked shifts that covered the full 24 hours, which meant plenty of night patrols through the garrison roads and footpaths. Block 7 fell within our patrol pattern, and because it housed a mix of units on rotation, it generated more than its fair share of callouts. Noise complaints, lights left on after hours, the odd scuffle between lads hooted one too many in the bar. I'd heard the usual whispers from the provost staff who'd been on island longer than me. Nothing specific, just vague comments about certain blocks feeling off after dark and advice to always take a partner on solo foot patrols. I put it down to the usual military superstition. Every long-established garrison has its haunted hangar or cursed cookhouse. I'd served in Germany and Catterick. There was always a story. The first time I felt something genuinely wrong was during a routine building check. We'd had a report of banging coming from the old officers' mess annex attached to the rear of Block 7. Empty for years. Used only for storage. I arrived with my torch, an extendable baton, pushed open the creaking side door, and swept the beam across the dusty tables and stacked chairs. Nothing obvious. No broken windows. No sign of forced entry. But the air inside was freezing, far colder than the warm night outside. And there was a faint smell like wet earth after rain. I moved deeper into the room, boots echoing on the tiled floor. This is military police. If anyone's in here, make yourself known now. Silence at first, then a single sharp bang from the far corner, as if a chair had been knocked over. I swung the torch that way, nothing. Another bang, closer. Then a rapid series of thuds, like someone dragging heavy furniture across the floor. Chairs that had been neatly stacked when I entered were now scattered. Some turned over, others piled in a haphazard tower that reached almost to the ceiling. Impossible to do that quietly. Impossible to do that fast. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I backed toward the door, radioing it in as possible vandalism, unknown intruder. But my voice sounded thinner than I liked. Outside, the night air hit me like a relief. No footprints in the dust. No drag marks. Nothing to explain what I'd just seen. A few nights later, I was on static gate duty at the Eastern Vehicle Checkpoint. Quiet shift, just logging the occasional staff car or supply truck coming back late from Akrotiri. Around 0130, the laughter started. Children's laughter, high-pitched, playful, coming from behind the guard hut. I turned, expecting to see local kids who'd somehow slipped through the outer fence. Nothing. Just the empty vehicle park and rows of parked Land Rovers gleaming under the security lights. The laughter moved, skipping between the vehicles as if a group of children were weaving in and out, playing tag. I stepped out of the hut, torch in one hand, radio in the other. Show yourselves. This is a restricted area. The giggling stopped abruptly, replaced by a single small sob that seemed to come from right beside me. I spun, empty space. Then tiny handprints appeared on the side of the nearest Wolf Land Rover, pale against the green paint, as if pressed there from inside the metal. Child-sized palms and fingers, perfectly formed. They stayed visible for maybe 10 seconds, then slowly faded, leaving the paint unmarked. I logged the incident as environmental anomaly and said nothing to the next shift. One of the local Cypriot cleaners, an older man named Andreas who'd worked on the base for decades, noticed I was rattled the next morning when he was mopping the guardroom floor. He crossed himself before speaking, voice low. The children. You heard them, yes? From the old village. When the troubles came in '74, many families sheltered near here. The shelling. Not all made it to safety. They stay close to where they felt safe. They don't mean harm. They just want to play. But they are sad too. They miss their homes. He wouldn't say more, just went back to his mopping. After that, the presence seemed to follow the RMP section specifically. Doors in the block would lock from the inside when no one was in the room. Radios would switch to static and then faint voices would break through. Children counting in Greek, or a woman calling names that weren't ours. One night Sergeant Klein responded to a disturbance call in the basement storage rooms under Block 7. He radioed that he was entering, then nothing for 20 minutes. When he came back up the stairs, he was white as paper, uniform disheveled, eyes wide. Hands, he said when I asked what happened. Dozens of them. Small ones, cold, grabbing at my sleeves, my legs, pulling me deeper in, whispering names, over and over. I felt them trying to keep me there. We started doubling up on every night patrol after that. No one wanted to walk the corridors of Block 7 alone. Requests for transfers to other duties started appearing, sudden medical appointments, family issues back home. Even the hardest provost lads found reasons to avoid the eastern side after last light. The presence wasn't violent. It didn't attack or threaten. It just watched, waited, made its existence impossible to ignore. Like it was reminding us that the ground we slept on, trained on, lived on, had once belonged to others. Others who had never truly left. And the longer you stayed in Block 7, the harder it became to pretend you were the only ones there. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Past. Warrant Officer Class 2 Baxter, Royal Logistics Corps, quartermaster responsible for the stores and supply chain at Decalia. I'd done 2 previous tours on the island, the first from 2010 to 2013, then back again in 2022 for a longer stint. The QM's job is straightforward on paper. Keep the ammunition, rations, fuel, spare parts, and bedding flowing to the right units at the right time. In practice, it means spending a lot of hours in dusty warehouses, checking manifests, chasing missing pallets, and dealing with the inevitable paperwork that follows every deployment. Block 7 had a large sub-level storage area beneath the main accommodation, 2 floors down, accessed by a concrete stairwell that always smelled faintly of damp and engine oil. It was where we kept the long-term holdings. Cases of MREs, medical supplies, spare weapon parts, and the overflow of ammunition that didn't fit in the main bunkers. By day, the stores were busy. Forklifts hummed, soldiers wheeled pallets around. The radio crackled with requests. At night, though, the place became a different world. The fluorescent tubes buzzed and flickered, casting harsh shadows between the tall racking. The air down there stayed cool year-round, and sound carried strangely. Every footstep echoed off the bare walls like someone was following you. The first oddities were small enough to dismiss. Items moved overnight. A pallet of ration packs that had been neatly stacked in L3 would be found in L5 the next morning. Tools laid out on a workbench would be rearranged into neat patterns, lines, circles, sometimes arrows all pointing in the same direction, east toward the green line. I bollocked the night shift storeman, thinking it was poor discipline or someone messing about. They swore blind they hadn't touched anything. Then the echo started. I was doing a late-night stocktake alone mistake, I know, around 2,330 hours. The rest of the garrison was quiet. Most lads were in their bunks or on guard. I was halfway down L7, clipboard in hand, counting boxes of 5.56 link, when I heard it. Static crackle, like an old field radio being keyed. Then voices, clear, urgent. British accents. Contact. Turks advancing on the left flank. Hold the line. A burst of automatic fire followed, short, controlled, exactly like a section on fire and maneuver. Then screams cut off abruptly. The sounds weren't coming from speakers. They were in the air itself, bouncing between the racks as if the battle was being fought right there in the stores. I froze, torch beam shaking. The gunfire stopped. Silence returned, except for my own breathing. I told myself it was bleed over from a training film someone had left running in a nearby room. But there were no rooms nearby with screens, just concrete and steel shelving. The next night, I wasn't alone. Lance Corporal Reeves was helping me shift some expired medical kits. We both heard it this time. The same radio chatter, the same orders, the same screams. Reeves dropped a crate. It hit the floor with a bang that should have drowned out everything else. It didn't. The echoes kept going, louder now, as if whatever was replaying them had noticed us listening. One midnight shift, I was checking the bottom racks near the back wall when the footsteps started. Heavy boots descending the stairwell. I called out, "That you, Reeves?" No answer. The steps continued, slow and measured, coming closer along the aisle. I swept the torch. Empty. Then a figure stepped into the beam. An officer, British, desert DPM, soaked dark with blood across the chest. He clutched a folded map in one hand, the other pressed to his side. His face was pale, eyes wide with urgency. "The coordinates." "They were wrong," he said, voice low and strained. "They're coming through the gap. We need to fall back." I backed up a step. "Who are you, sir?" He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged forward, fast, desperate. His hand passed straight through my arm. The cold was instant, bone deep, like plunging into ice water. For a split second, the stores vanished. I saw smoke, burning vehicles, paratroopers landing under tracer fire, civilians running with bundles of belongings. Then I was back, sprawled on the cold floor, torch rolling away, hours later according to my watch. My arm was numb for the rest of the night. I started digging into the base archives during duty hours. Declassified reports from 1974. Operation Attila, the Turkish invasion. British forces had held a neutral line around the sovereign base areas. But stray shells and confused firefights had caused casualties. Several officers were listed as killed in action or missing during the chaos of those first days. One name matched the face I'd seen, Captain R. Ellis, 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, killed when his position was overrun after incorrect intelligence about enemy movements. The echoes didn't stop. Some nights the entire sub-level would fill with ghostly movement, soldiers in 1970s kit running crouched between the racks, taking cover behind pallets that weren't there, returning fire at shapes only they could see. Tracers lit the dark in silent flashes. No bullets hit anything real, but the smell of cordite lingered for minutes afterward. Lads started refusing to go below ground after dark. "Not worth the risk, WO2, they'd say, eyes avoiding mine. Even the older storemen who'd laughed off the stories before began finding excuses. I tried to keep it business as usual, extra checks, better lighting, buddy system. But the truth was, none of us wanted to be down there alone. Those echoes weren't random. They were memories trapped in the place where men had died, still fighting a battle that had ended half a century earlier. And every time we walked those aisles, we were walking through their last moments, whether we wanted to or not. Chapter 6. The night refusals began. Captain Reynolds, commanding a rifle company from the Duke of Lancaster's regiment during a 6-month Roman tour at Decalia. When we arrived, the garrison was running like clockwork. Daily training cycles, UNFICYP commitments along the buffer zone, and the usual quick reaction force standby rotations. I'd heard the odd murmur about Block 7 from the outgoing unit. Tired soldiers spinning yarns about strange noises and cold spots. But I filed it under the usual end-of-tour exaggeration. Men under pressure see shapes in the dark. It's human nature. My priority was getting the company bedded in, weapons zeroed, and the platoon sharp for whatever tasking came down from brigade. The first real crack appeared during a company-level night exercise. We were practicing live fire advances across the eastern training area, close to the old ammunition bunkers and the perimeter wire. Standard serial. Sections bounding forward under simulated covering fire, flares popping overhead, blanks mixed with live tracer for the GPMGs to keep it realistic. Halfway through the final assault line, the radio net exploded with shouts. "Abort! Abort! Contacts in the smoke! Figures moving left flank, not ours. I was in the command trench with the CSM, monitoring the serial. We scrambled forward through the cordon to find two sections scattered, weapons abandoned in the dirt. Lads on their knees or sitting with heads in hands. Private Lowe, normally a steady operator, was shaking uncontrollably. They came out of the smoke, sir. Dozens of them. Old uniforms, rifles up, charging straight at us like we were the enemy. I checked the range log. No other units were out that night. The safety staff confirmed the area clear. Helmet cam footage from the platoon sergeants showed nothing but static and glitch at the exact moment the panic hit. Then brief overlays of ghostly images. Soldiers in 1970s kit advancing through the tracer haze. The footage corrupted after that. Techs couldn't recover it. I wrote it off initially as mass fatigue, long flight in, heat acclimatization, the stress of a new operational theater. But morale dipped noticeably the next day. Lads who'd normally volunteer for extra duties suddenly went quiet. Guard rosters started coming back with holes. Unfit for duty. Dental appointment. Compassionate. When I pressed the platoon commanders, they admitted the men were talking openly about refusing certain posts. It came to a head one Thursday night. The duty officer reported that an entire guard section, 8 men scheduled for staggered shifts on the eastern Sangas and Block 7 internal sentry, had failed to parade. I went down to the block myself with the CSM. The lads were in their section room, still in civvies, sitting on bunks or leaning against lockers. No defiance in their posture, just pale faces and exhaustion. I paraded them informally in the corridor. This is a direct order. Kit up and get on your posts. Refusal in the face of duty is a serious offense. One of the corporals, a veteran with Afghanistan flashes on his arm, spoke up quietly. With respect, sir, we can't. Not after dark. Not there. The others nodded. No shouting, no mutiny. Just flat refusal born of genuine fear. The CSM started to tear into them. But I held him back. I could see it in their eyes. These weren't malingerers. These were good soldiers who'd stared down real threats and come through. Later that night, I walked the eastern perimeter myself with just the RSM for company. Floodlights were on full, generators humming. Halfway along the wire near Sanga 5, the temperature dropped sharply. Breath fogged in front of us, even though it was 25 degrees. Then the whispers started, low, overlapping, some in English, some in languages I didn't recognize. Names being called that weren't ours. My own among them. Reynolds, leave this place. I felt the pressure build, like walking into a headwind that wasn't there. The RSM stopped dead, torch beam trembling. You hearing that, sir? I nodded. We pressed on, but every step felt heavier. At the corner of Block 7 I saw her, a woman in a simple dress, hanging from the old fig tree that overhung the rear wall. Body swaying gently though there was no breeze. Face obscured by dark hair. For a second I thought it was real. Then she was gone, leaving only the faint creak of rope that wasn't there. Back in the company office, I sat with a brew I didn't drink. The RSM, a man who'd served in every hot spot from the Balkans to Basra, looked me in the eye. It's real, boss. Whatever's here, it's had enough of us. We adapted quickly after that. Floodlights on permanent. No solo posts. Guard shifts paired or tripled. I even authorized moving 2 platoons to newer accommodation on the western side, citing maintenance issues in the report to battalion. Officially, the refusals never happened. Unofficially, every officer and senior NCO knew the score. The men weren't cowards. They were reacting to something that defied explanation. Something that had waited decades for acknowledgement and wasn't prepared to stay silent any longer. When duty demands you stand your ground against an enemy you can't see, can't fight, and can't reason with, even the best soldiers reach a limit. That night the refusals began was the night we all. Chapter 7. Confronting the haunt. Major Thorne, intelligence officer attached to 16 Air Assault Brigade headquarters during a staff tour at Dekelia. My job was threat analysis, pattern recognition, piecing together fragments of information from signals intercepts, patrol reports, and local sources to build a clear operational picture. When the first informal mentions of unexplained phenomena started appearing in company sitreps, I treated them as I would any other anomaly. Something to be logged, cross-referenced, and if necessary neutralized. Morale issues, environmental factors, or low-level psychological operations by hostile actors. There's always a rational explanation if you dig deep enough. But the reports kept coming. Consistent details across multiple units, ranks, and years. Block 7 as the epicenter. Manifestations tied to the 1974 invasion. Apparitions in period uniforms. Auditory phenomena replaying specific events. No mass hysteria pattern. No shared contaminant in the water supply. No unusual EM readings from the tech sweeps. Psychological evaluations came back clean. Soldiers were fit, stressed only to normal garrison levels. I began a quiet, off-the-books investigation. Pulled every declassified file on the sovereign base areas from the invasion period. Overlaid historical maps against current garrison layouts. Interviewed long-serving local staff under the guise of routine security updates. The picture that emerged was disturbing in its simplicity. The Eastern accommodation blocks, including Block 7 and its sub-level stores, had been constructed rapidly in the early 1960s on land requisitioned after independence. That land had included parts of 2 small Cypriot villages and associated farmland. In July 1974, when Turkish forces landed, the area around Dikelia became a chaotic no-man's land. Refugee columns passed through, temporary camps sprang up, and stray artillery from both sides caused civilian casualties. One unmarked mass grave, hastily dug for victims of a misdirected airstrike, was recorded in a faded UNFICYP report. Its coordinates placed it directly beneath the foundations of Block 7's basement storage area. The grave had never been exhumed or memorialized. Officially, it had been dealt with decades ago. In practice, it had been built over and forgotten. The soldiers weren't imagining things. They were reacting to trauma embedded in the ground itself. I decided on a direct approach. One night in late autumn, when the garrison was at its quietest, I volunteered for a solo vigil in the sub-level stores. No audience, no recording equipment beyond a small digital voice recorder and a thermal camera. Tools for evidence, not theatrics. I descended the stairwell at 2,345 hours. Torch in one hand, sidearm holstered but accessible. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, the fluorescents flickered once, then steadied. I walked the central aisle slowly, speaking aloud, calm, measured, the way you address a potentially hostile contact. My name is Major Thorne. I serve with the British Army station here. I've read the reports from 1974. I know what happened on this ground. If you can hear me, I'm listening. Silence at first. Then the temperature plummeted further. My breath clouded thickly. The recorder picked up the first EVP, faint at first, then building. Overlapping voices in Greek, Turkish, English. Children crying. A woman calling a name. Orders shouted in panic. The sounds of shelling, distant thumps that vibrated through the concrete. Shapes formed at the edges of the torch beam. Not solid figures, but coalescences of shadow and light. Soldiers in mixed uniforms. Civilians clutching belongings. Children holding hands. Dozens of them, filling the aisles between the racks. They didn't advance aggressively. They simply stood, watching, waiting. One stepped forward. An older man in civilian clothes, face lined with exhaustion. His mouth moved. No sound emerged, but the meaning arrived clear in my mind. Images of homes burning, families separated, bodies buried in haste under olive trees. A question repeated, wordless but unmistakable. "Why are you still here?" I answered aloud. We didn't know. The records were buried. The land was taken. The graves forgotten. That stops now. The figures shifted. More joined. British soldiers this time. Young faces under old helmets. Bloodied but standing to attention as if reporting for orders that would never come. The air filled with a pressure that made my ears pop. The collective presence pressed closer. Not threatening, but insistent. Demanding acknowledgement. I spoke again. We will mark this place properly. Names where we have them. A memorial. Respect. The pressure eased. The shapes began to thin, faces turning away one by one. The cold lifted gradually. By 0300 the stores were empty again, silent except for the hum of the lights. The recorder held 40 minutes of clear voices, names, fragments of last conversations. A child counting to 10 in Greek. Evidence, if any were needed. The next week I submitted a formal proposal through command channels. A small stone plaque at the rear of Block 7, inscribed with a neutral remembrance of all those, military and civilian, who lost their lives in the area during the 1974 conflict. No politics, no blame, just acknowledgement. It was approved quietly and quickly. A short ceremony was held at dawn, attended by the CO, the Padre, a UNFICYP liaison, and a handful of local elders. No speeches, just a minute's silence and the laying of wreaths. The phenomena didn't vanish overnight, but they changed. The oppressive weight lifted. Guard refusal stopped. Soldiers still reported the occasional cold spot or distant voice, but the sense of active resentment was gone. Whatever had been trapped here had finally been heard. In intelligence, we deal in facts, patterns, and probabilities. I can't explain what happened that night in rational terms, but I can state with certainty that when you build over the unrested dead, when you live, train, and sleep on ground soaked in unresolved grief, you invite consequences. The haunt of Deucalion wasn't malice. It was memory, raw and unrelenting, demanding the simplest of human decencies, to be remembered.